G'day YouTube, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stefan, aka Hippo. Do you guys hear that? Yeah, that's the Battlefield theme. You can't actually hear it because I'll get a copyright strike, but you can hear it. Now this week is also known as Battlefield 2042 release week, and for anyone who loves the Battlefield series, it's quite an exciting week. Now when I opened the game for the first time, I noticed a really cool loading animation down the bottom that uses some super simple motion graphic techniques to achieve. So what we're going to do today is run through how to make the loading animation from BF2042.
I can't take kills. Oh. I'm dead. Oh, hey guys, sorry. Shit, hang on, Alt Tab. Yeah, so we're here for the tutorial, right? Let's do that. Alrighty, here we are in After Effects, in your happy place. And what we're gonna do, what I'm gonna show you is how to achieve something like this. Now, as soon as I saw this little loading animation on the new game, on the new Battlefield game, I was like, that's cool. It uses a bunch of different techniques, which I think are useful to know. And basically what I think this tutorial is gonna be about is looking at something like this and going, okay, how am I going to achieve that? Where do I start? Just the sequence of events, which I think are the best to go through to achieve something cool like this. We'll also slap on a glitch effect at the end there. So let's get right to it. All right, so the first thing I want you to think about is accuracy. Accuracy of your shapes is going to lead to accurate animations. I did speak about this for a moment in my top 3 plugins tutorial, which you can check out here. Super handy, check it out. One of those plugins I talked about in that tutorial was Reposition Anchor Point, and that's going to be super handy to have. I'll put the download link in the description. Super handy to have for this case, but if you don't, I will show you a way to do it manually. And where do we start? To get accuracy, we're going to make a grid. Okay, we're going to make a grid and we're going to make sure the anchor point for these shapes is in the correct position. Also, guys, I'll link the project files in the description. So if you want to have this project and play along with it as I talk about it, then the project files are right there for you to download. And also be sure to check out that Reposition Anchor Point plugin if you want to use that. So let's get into it. Let's start a fresh composition. Okay, so I'm gonna make a new composition here and I'm gonna make it 2000 by 2000. You can make it 1000 by 1000 if you want. And I'm gonna call this my BF2042 loading animation. Okay, 2000 by 2000 square pixels, 25 frames per second, just 10 seconds for now. And then we'll see as we go along if we need to shorten it. And press OK. We've created a new composition here, and now we need to get that accurate grid up. That grid is going to give us an easy way to place our shapes down accurately and make sure they're in the middle, make sure they're positioned correctly. So let's hit Control R to make our ruler show up. Then come up to the View menu here. So we've got Show Rulers, which is Control R, Show Guides, which is Control semicolon, Snap to Guides, which is Control Shift semicolon, and then Lock Guides. Lock Guides is what we'll click once we are happy with our positioning. Let's get our first grid in. So you drag from over here on the ruler, you drag across, and let's pop it there. And you can actually see in the top right corner here on the info window. If you can't see your info window, I'll just zoom in here for a second. You see the X position there is 0. So let's do the X position first. You can see the position up here on this. If you need more space, you can zoom in here, make it fit to the comp, and it'll be easier to find that position. So let's go across to 2000 because we made our composition 2000 by 2000. Now, if it's finicky and you can't find the right number and it's hard to scroll, you can right click and edit the position and you can put that exactly where you need to, 2000. Then we're going to find half of that. So we're going to drag another ruler across from over there and go to 1000. Put my ruler in there. I'm going to right click my ruler and edit it 1000. Then I'm going to do half of half. In this case, 1500, and then this side as well, 500. I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's do the Y, or the up and down. Let's pop on down there at, where is it, 0, right click, add a position 0. I'm gonna come further down, all the way down. You can see that Y position up there again, 2000, down to halfway, So pop it somewhere in the middle, right click, edit position, 1000. We're going to do half of half again. So right click, that'll be 500. And then the bottom section as well, that'll be 1500. Now for the y-axis, I'm actually going to do half of half of half. Let's go through there, find the halfway point there. That's 250, 0, 250, 500, 750, 1000, 1250. 1,500, 1,750. So again, if you can't get accuracy on this ruler, just put it somewhere, right click on it, edit position, 1750. That is our little guide set up. And now we're going to make some shapes to perfectly fit in that guide. So let's just have a look at this. I captured this from the game here for a moment, and I'm just going to zoom in. So it's quite a symmetrical movement. It's a plus symbol and the middle section is empty. All of these squares are the same size. And they're all linked around the corners. We need 4 shapes. We need that empty space in the middle that's the same as all the other squares. And then we'll get into the movement. All right, so come up here to your rectangle tool. You can also press Q on the keyboard. Tool create shape. Bezier path is unchecked. And I color picked this color from the battlefield loading animation. 12F3D5 is the hex number there. So I'm gonna make my first shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. I've got snapping on there. So let's look at that. If you hold shift, it'll make a perfect square for you. Let's actually have a look at how big that is. We come down here to the shape layer. It's created this rectangle. You come down here to, it's actually a square. Come down here to size, and we want it to be 500 by 500. And if you zoom in, you can see that anchor point's not exactly in the middle. One way to do that is to press the pan behind tool and then select your anchor point, and you'll see that it'll snap to the grid. So just snap it to the middle there. So now we're going to make 4 copies of that to make this plus symbol. So remembering the middle section is empty, and then there's the 4 squares around it. So click on the shape, press Control D or Command D to duplicate, Shift drag that shape up, and if your snapping is on, it'll snap to the top of that shape. Come up here to view, make sure snap to guides is on. Okay, click on that center one, press Command or Control D again, and then Shift drag it down, press on the center one again, Control D or Command D, Shift drag it across, make sure it snaps. Middle one again, Control D or Command D, Shift drag across, and it snaps. Then we can press on that middle one and delete it. So there's our plus symbol. You can press Control and semicolon to hide your guides. There's our design. Pretty cool. So you can see how those guides really helped us create that symmetrical design. Now we need to go through and make sure each of these squares has its anchor point in the right position. Because if we have a look at this little animation, you'll notice, and they rotate, where is it? They rotate here. They rotate from their middle section. They're all folding out from the middle outwards, right? So our anchor point needs to be on this edge of this square. So just press Control semicolon if your guides are off again, and just press Y on the keyboard to get your pan behind tool, or click the pan behind tool up here and move your anchor point. So you see, I'm accidentally moving my grid. Just undo, come up here to view and go lock guides. That won't move your grid or guides. All right, I've pressed Y. I'm gonna move that anchor point, make sure it snaps on this corner here, zoom in. If it's not snapping, hold Control and it'll snap to the corner. If you hold Control on your anchor point, you can actually snap to certain positions. Now, if you want to learn about that plugin I was talking about called Reposition Anchor Point, look what it can do. If I click on the shape, I want that anchor point to be down the bottom middle there. I can just click bottom middle, boom. Click on the shape, top middle, reposition, boom. So it just takes away that manual handling of it. Like I said, watch this top 3 plugins video linked here if you want to learn more about that plugin and installing it, but I'll keep doing it manually for now for you guys. So I've now moved the anchor point on all of those squares to the correct position. They're all facing inwards. I'm going to bring the logo in here for reference, and I'm going to start animating. Let's put it down the bottom here. I'm going to start animating to this point here. It's folded out, it stops there. All right, so how do we animate a fold like this, where it's almost like 3-dimensional? It's moving in 3-dimensional space. After Effects is not technically a 3D program. It can handle 3D things, and it's getting better and better at it. There's some 3D shading you can do, some 3D text, but it's not a 3D program, strictly speaking. Now you can get stuff like Element 3D, which you can make 3D things within After Effects. But in this case, After Effects is known as a 2.5 dimensional compositing tool. Basically what that means is I can animate 2-dimensional objects in 3D space. So to make these squares fold like this, like almost like a card flopping upwards, I'm moving that square in 3D space. So I'm going to move this 2-dimensional object that I've just created here in 3D space. And what I'm actually going to do is just rename these. Square 1, so that one up here, and that's square 2, square 3, square 4. So to move these in 3D space, I need to toggle my 3D layer switch. So if you come down here, you'll see 3D layer. If you check this box, it will allow this layer to be manipulated in 3 dimensions. I'm going to check those on all 4 of my boxes. So now, if I just press R on one of my squares, you can see all of a sudden I've got X, Y, Z rotation, which means I can rotate it this direction. I can rotate it that direction. And I can rotate it that direction. All in 3D space, right? Or 2.5D space. If I take off my checkbox, all I have is my normal rotation. So that 3D toggle can be very handy in a lot of cases. So we want to make these fold in, right? So what I usually do with time, do you see how there's a bit of an offset here where some of them animate first? What I normally do is I just animate them all at once, coming at the same time. Find an ending point. Let's end there. I like to animate from the end backwards, the end of an action back to the beginning. That helps me preserve the beginning point of whatever design I have. And I think it just makes it easier because sometimes you can animate, you'll be animating and you're like, oh shit, I forgot where the original position was. So it's a bit annoying. I like animating from the end point. So what I'm going to do, come here, I'm going to press R on square 1. And I know if I just press, yes, so I want to animate on square 1, and I want to animate the X rotation. So change that back to 0. I'm going to pop a keyframe there by clicking the little stopwatch. So that stopwatch now is automatically keyframing. So if I make any change to that rotation at a different time point on the timeline, I will get an automatic keyframe. So if I come back from that point, which is 21 frames, back to 0, I'm going to then flop this forward, and it's going to be 180 degrees, right? So we're not flopping it all the way around, we're just flopping it forward on itself. It's going to be 180 degrees. So now that square is going to move from 180 degrees to 0 in 2.5D space. Cool. So let's go back to 21 frames there and go to square 2 and press R on square 2 for rotation. And we can see here that I need to animate, not X. So here's, I'm not animating the X on this one. I'm going to animate the Y on that one. So back down to 0, chuck the keyframe on that one, 21 frames, move it down to 0 on the timeline, and we want that to be 180 degrees. Play that. You can see now they both are folding open from the middle. Now we'll do the same for square 3. Press R on square 3 and X. So it's going to be the same as the other one. It's going to be X, but we're going to go the opposite direction. We're going to go minus degree. From 21 frames, I'm going to hit that stopwatch to auto keyframe and then back down to 0. And I'm going to make it minus 180. And then last but not least, square number 4, that's going to be animating the Y, just like square number 2. And again, we're going to be animating in the opposite direction, so minus. I'm going to go to 21 frames, hit that stopwatch, come back down to 0, and change this to minus 180. So now I've got all 4 shapes animated. I'm just going to select them all. Just press U on the keyboard and then press U again. If you press U on the keyboard, that'll only show animated properties of those layers. So it just cleans it up a bit. Let's have a look at this. There we go. So they're all animating out. So now comes the timing part of it, right? So they're not all coming out at the same time. Let's look at the reference we have up there. So left and top come out first. So left number 4 comes out first. Then number 1. Then number 2, and then number 3. I could have probably numbered these differently, but so be it. 4 comes first. Then I'm going to shift those keyframes along for number 1. Just delay it a little bit. And then I'm going to shift it for the next one, delay that a little bit. And then I'm going to shift it for the next square, delay those a little bit. Now you can move your keyframes or you can also move the layer, but I like preserving the start point over the layer. So let's have a look at what that looks like. That looks pretty good, but it's all a little bit slow, right? So let's select the last keyframe of all of our layers. You can draw a marquee selection tool around that, starting from a gray spot in your timeline. And try and select them all like that and just bring it in. Let's see what that looks like. Too much of a delay in my opinion. So I'm going to move these keyframes back there, move these ones back there. Still a slight delay there, as you can see. And let's see what that looks like. Much better. Timing wise, it matches my my frame up there. All right, so what's next? We'll have a look here. They all sort of jump outwards. So they all pop out. Like when it pops out, there's a nice little pause there, which I think is really cool. Let's have a look at that. Pop. All right. Pop. So how we're going to do that, now we're going to animate position on these squares. Select all your squares, press P on the keyboard, that'll bring up position. So to do that, we're going to find, again, the starting point is here. We're going to preserve that starting point in this case, and then preserve the end point as well, where they all come back there. So let's zoom in our timeline here by pressing this little zoom in mountain here. You can also press plus on the keyboard to zoom in there. So I've marked the starting point and the ending point of that animation. Out, in, out, hold, and back in, and a little bounce at the end there. All right, and these are all at the same time so they can all be synced. So let's go out and find that out point. Unselect all your layers, select square one. I'm gonna move it by hovering over it and doing the Y. And I'm gonna move it up, where were we? 750. 750, I'm gonna go to 650. That's gonna move it up by 100 pixels. Okay, it stops there and it holds. So let's hold it for 2 frames. Copy that keyframe, Control C, and make sure you're 2 frames away from it. 1, 2, Control V. It's now pasted that keyframe there. And then it's gonna make its way back down beyond the point of where it originated from, and then it'll come back. Take this last keyframe, copy it, paste it right here, and then push it further down. So let's go to 800. You can see now it's dipping down below its original position. So let's just play that back, and we're just focusing on that top one there. Okay, looks pretty good. But let's just easy ease this middle keyframe here. All right, so starting point goes up, holds in that same position, moves down beyond its original point, and then comes back up to its origin point. So select that second to last keyframe, the one where it goes beyond, and then just press F9 on the keyboard or right click Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease. Let's see what that looks like. Nice little bounce there. Now we're going to apply that same technique with the other square. So let's go to square 2. We're going to move that again. We're going to move that position now on the x-axis. So we're going this way. Before we were going up. Now we're going this way from 1250, and like the other one where we moved 100 pixels, we're going to move 100 pixels for this one as well. So it used to be 1250. Let's go 1350. Then we're going to hold there. So copy that keyframe, go 2 keyframes across by holding Control and pressing right arrow, Control V to paste that same keyframe. So we're doing the hold. Then we're going to come 2 frames across again by pressing Control on the keyboard, left, right. That's how you go across your timeline. And we're going to select that last keyframe, copy it, Control C or Command C, and then press Control V, and then bring it beyond. So how far beyond did we go? We went from 800, from 750 to 800, so 50 pixels beyond. So 50 pixels beyond 1250 is 1200. That has moved that in now. I'm just going to select that keyframe, F9 on the keyboard, or right-click Keyframe Assistant. All right, now let's move on to see if those match. Looking good. You get the picture. I'll just fast forward this one here. Alrighty, the first little section is done there. So we've done our little bounce and position. Looking good. Now the next section involves scaling down each of those little squares proportionately, scaling them down and reducing their opacity. So this is where you really need to start thinking about anchor points, because those little boxes are scaling from the middle, right? You can see they're scaling proportionately to themselves. They're not scaling towards the center or the right or the top of the middle. Let me show you. If I scale this square right now, press S on the keyboard, scale it, it's going to scale towards its anchor point. It's going to scale towards the middle. So how do we scale something? You can't change the anchor point, and it's going to change the other animations that you've specifically created with that anchor point. So this is how we do it. It might seem a little bit barbaric, but super simple. You go to that last keyframe, that section is done. You select your 4 squares and you press Control-Shift-D. That'll slice those layers. You keep them all selected and move them to the top. Basically what I've done here is I've got square 1 through 4 is that first animated section, and then now square 5, 6, 7, 8 is going to be the next animated section. But what you need to do first is press U on the keyboard. That brings up all of the animated properties of those new ones you just made, and just unselect all of your little keyframes there for position and rotation on all of the layers. Now you've got these fresh layers that haven't been animated. So like I said before, if you look at the squares up there, they're scaling proportionately to themselves. They're scaling inwards towards the middle of their shape. If I, again, just look at square 8 for a second, scale it, it's scaling to where we had the anchor point before. So let's move these anchor points. First, I'm just going to turn off the 3D on these layers. We will not need that anymore. So I'm going to select my new layers, turn off the 3D. Then I'm going to come in and move those anchor points to the middle. You can watch this top 3 plugins video that I have linked up here, and you can use the reposition anchor point plugin and just quickly and easily reposition that anchor point to the middle for all of them in one click. Or I'll show you how to do it manually. Select your first square, press the pan behind tool up here, which is Y on the keyboard, and just drag that anchor point, hold Control, and it'll line it up. And it'll line up to the middle there. And moving down to your next one, select that anchor point, move it across, hold Control, move it to the middle. Select that one there, hold Control, move it to the middle. Select the anchor point there, hold Control and move it to the middle. Now all of those squares have their anchor points in the middle. So we'll animate them all at the same time, and then we'll move the keyframes across. I'm going to color code these layers. I'll make them orange. So now we know that these are the second shapes and these are the first shapes. So select your 4 squares, press S on the keyboard and animate scale from right from the beginning of that shape on the timeline. I'm just going to focus on one of the squares, the first one they're in, and out there. Going to put another keyframe down there. So that's the beginning point and that's the end point, and the middle point right here. And with them all selected, we can go down. Let's go to 95. That's applied it to all of them because I had them all selected. Let's see what that looks like. Click away. Not bad, but I think it needs a little bit more. Instead of 95, let's go to select all your squares there. Make sure you're on that middle keyframe. That way we're editing that keyframe. The way to check to make sure you're actually on your keyframe is this little blue keyframe is highlighted here. That means you're on a keyframe. If you're off of a keyframe, it's not highlighted. So go onto your keyframe there. I'm going to go a little bit further to maybe 90. Now with all those layers selected, we're going to press, instead of just pressing T to bring up opacity, we're going to press Shift T. What that does is it keeps scale, what you were just animating, but it adds opacity down below it. So let's go to our starting point here with all of our layers still selected and press the stopwatch on opacity. Down to the end one here and press that little keyframe button here. So now we've locked in our beginning and ending, which is 100% opacity. And when it comes to the middle here, the opacity goes down. Let's see what it looks like. Let's say 45%. So it all goes down like that. Quite cool. I'm going to select all of those keyframes. I'm just going to right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. That's just going to smooth out those animations nicely. Now we've got the timing thing, right? So that left one goes first, then the top one, then the right one, and then the bottom one. This one first. I'm actually going to move that up to the top. That one first. Then with your arrow selected, just press selection tool V on the keyboard. Just move those keyframes across 2 frames and see what that looks like. Maybe 3 frames. Let's see what that looks like. That's a nice little delay there. And then the next one, we're going to move those keyframes across, again, 3 frames from the next starting point. So 1, 2, 3. Don't move the layer. Like I said before, if you move the layer, you run the risk of missing a square. So preserve that starting point and move the keyframes instead. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 is now the next point. So move these keyframes across there. So let's see what that looks like. Pretty good. All right, now that little animated section ends right there. So let's select all those layers and just make them small again. If we look at our timeline, we've got our first little intro there. Then we've got our next animation there. And now they're going to rotate and do the scale thing again. Now, one easy way to rotate all of these objects together from one middle point is using a null object. So I'm going to make a new null object. What a null object does is allows you to apply effects to one null object and then tie all other layers to that layer. So instead of applying effect to multiple layers and clogging up your machine, you're actually able to tie everything to one layer, and it just cleans things up. Null objects are great. I highly suggest using them. Let's give it a go. So layer new null object, or Control-Alt-Shift-Y. Control-Alt-Shift-Y. That's created a null object, and by default, it's created it right in the middle with the anchor point right in the middle. So perfect. That's exactly what we need. If we press A on the keyboard, see where the anchor point of that is. With this composition, it is at 0, 0. So X position 0, Y position 0. I'm going to rename that null object rotation control. Tie all of my orange squares to that rotation control. And now if I press R on that rotation control, you can see that they all rotate together. Magic. So let's have a look at that. The sample up there, it's rotating right, and it looks like it's rotating, let's see, it looks like it's rotating to this position here, which 135, that looks good. It has lined itself up. So that's where it's rotating to. We'll click the little stopwatch. That's the starting point. And then it comes to rest 135. All right, I'm going to select those two keyframes, press F9 on the keyboard, or right click keyframe assistant, easy ease. Looking good. And then it repeats that scale and opacity animation, right? So we've done that already. So we don't need to animate it again. We'll just find the starting point. There's the starting point. And it's going to start with that shape there. So press U on the keyboard and you can see there that we've already done that animation. So select all those keyframes, Control C, Control V from that point onwards. Then you can see the next one starts. And then we're going to do it again 3 frames. So Control on the keyboard, 1, 2, 3. Select the next layer, press U to see all of your animated properties. Select all the keyframes, Control C, Control V. Then move 3 frames forward again, Control 1, 2, 3. Click on the next layer, press U on the keyboard, select all your keyframes, Control C and Control V. Then move 3 frames forward, 1, 2, 3. Select your next layer, U on the keyboard, select all your keyframes, Control C, Control V. And just like that, because you animated that before and you're using a separate null object to handle your control, to handle your rotation, you can do stuff like this where you reuse the animation that you've done. That's just sped things up massively for you. Otherwise you would have to have done that manually, which would have been silly. And now what happens next? They rotate in and of themselves and then they move inwards, and they over rotate a bit there and then they come back to the middle. Okay. So let's bring up what we're going to need for this. We're going to need rotation and position. So starting from the starting point, which is here, select those squares, those 4 squares, P on the keyboard, and then hold Shift and do R for rotation. So now we're looking at our position and rotation keyframes. So with all those selected, click the position keyframe and click the rotation keyframe. They're all going to rotate clockwise. And they're all going to rotate to 45 degrees. All right, so that's the starting point and that's the end point. They're all going to rotate to 45 degrees. So with all of my layers selected, all those squares, I'm going to change that to 45 degrees and it'll apply it to all of them. So you can see there, it has rotated it from that point to that point. And then now they're all going to converge in the center. So I'm going to move their positions now. Let's start with square, with the top right square. I'm going to move it down here, and I believe minus 360 is going to be the correct position. It's to come a little bit more. Minus 354. Okay, let's try this next one. This is going to be just a 354, but that looks pretty good. 354. Click away from it. It looks like they've all melded, but as you can see there, it sort of over rotates for a second and then comes back. Let's over rotate. So we're going to go past 45 to, let's go back a few keyframes, maybe 3, 1, 2, 3. Select all your layers and over rotate. So we know that the last keyframe is 45 degrees. So we're going to go further to, let's go to 50. And let's see what this looks like. All right, it's doing the little over rotation, but it's not smooth. So select all your keyframes, F9 on the keyboard, or right click keyframe assistant, easy ease. Let's have a look what that looks like. Pretty smooth. Then one last time, it does the scale and opacity trick. So select all your layers again, S for scale, and then hold Shift and T. Now we see all of our animation properties again. Choose the starting point. First layer to go is that one there. So select its properties. Might be a little bit confusing with how you've structured your layers, but just keep an eye on this. So the starting point is there. So we want it to start scaling down. Select all these, Control C, Control V. The next one to go is this top right one. So I'm going to move 3 frames forward, 1, 2, 3. Select those same keyframes, Control C, Control V. Then I'm going to select the next one, which is this one here. Go 3 frames forward, Control 1, 2, 3. Select all those keyframes, Control C, Control V. And then come down to this last one here, 3 frames forward, 1, 2, 3. Select all those keyframes, Control C, Control V. All right, so it gets a little bit messy there for any neat freaks out there. This might be a little bit messy because they come out of order slightly there. But there's your little animation. And then the last part is the whole thing scales down, and next minute it becomes that turning animation, that square. So let's select the last frame here before it starts moving again. Press N on the keyboard, which cuts your timeline, and go Composition, Trim Comp to Work Area. So now we start there. Let's just hide our little reference. Control semicolon to hide all the grids. Looking pretty good. But now it's going to move. You see how it just jumps down. What we actually need to do is look at that sample again and see where it scales, scaling down to there. That's where it scales down to. So now we're going to make a scale control with a null object. So layer, new null object, enter scale control. And I'm going to tie all of these first squares up to the scale control. Now we have a central scale control that'll scale from the middle of the composition rather than any anchor point on the square itself. We choose that as our ending point, move back to this point here, and we're going to try and match the scale of what it looks like at the end. Bring our grid back up. So we're trying to match it to this section of the grid here. Okay, so go back, scale that up, match it right there. All right, now let's press Control, semicolon, hide our reference, and then down here. Looking good. Pretty good. There is a little gap there. So I'm just going to go in here, press position on all of my yellow squares. And where did I move them to? 354 minus 353. We'll just shift that in. Minus 353 instead of 354. That should, yeah, that closes the gap nicely. Let's play that one more time. Looking good. Nice clean loop as well. Now there's a couple of things missing. We need a nice little ethereal glow behind everything, and there's a slight glitch going on. So let's start with motion blur. Now select all of your squares and click the little motion blur toggle here. If you don't see your motion blur toggle, click down here, down this one, expand and collapse the layer switches pane, and click that motion blur one, and now the global motion blur switch has switched on as well. So let's take a look now. We've got some motion blur. Now that really starts selling it. Now, if you ever need to increase or decrease your motion blur, composition settings, advanced, shutter angle will usually be at 180. If you want more motion blur, chuck it up to 650. And if you want more samples on each of those little blurs, increase your sample per frame limit here. That might chug a bit on some computers, but have a play with those numbers. The higher the shutter angle, the greater the motion blur effect will be. But I'm pretty happy with where that is at 650. Looking good. Now let's add that little glow in the background. So select all of your layers, including your null objects. Make sure you do that. And then Control-Shift-C to pre-compose that. And we'll call this the core animation. Now that's pre-composed it all into one layer. It still retains its motion blur, but we want to add a little glow to the background. So how I do it is just duplicate that layer. And the bottom one, rename it glow. and come over here to your effects panel and choose Gaussian blur, not the legacy one. Chuck that on your bottom layer, and then just increase your glow to, what do we want? Maybe 300. That's a nice glow. Then you can press T on the keyboard and just reduce that slightly. So now we've got the motion blur and we've got the glow, and it's looking pretty schmick. But we're just going to finish with a glitch. So how do we do this glitch effect? I've tried many different methods over time, but one popped out to me. So shout out to Ben Marriott, who created a tutorial that made glitches easy. So let's jump right into his method. Let's make a new layer, new solid. We're going to call this layer fractal noise. Enter. Right click that fractal noise layer, come to effect, down to noise, add fractal noise to that layer. Now fractal noise, really cool effect. It can surprisingly be used for many, many things. If you ever watched Andrew Kramer's tutorials from Video Copilot, you'll see that he's used it for things that you're like, what? How did that happen? It's a great effect. So come up here to noise type, change it to block, and then we're going to stretch that across. So come down here to transform, untick uniform scaling, and then scale the width across like that, and the height down like that. So I've scaled it quite a bit. So 1,300 and something like 50. Looking pretty good. Now evolution will make that chatter. Now we want to make evolution just continuously chatter. So how we do that? We use a script. So to apply a script to any animation, you hold Alt while clicking the little stopwatch. Click the stopwatch, come down here, a little text box pops up. Now we want that to happen every second throughout the comp. And the way to do that is we'll go time times asterisk. Let's try, I think he used 500. So let's go 500 and see what that looks like. It'll continuously chatter. Looking pretty good. Now we come down to our core animation. So right click your core animation layer, come to effect, distort, and choose displacement map. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the fractal noise to displace our core animation. So how the displacement map works is it looks at the colors that you have on your layer and it displaces it up to a maximum number. So white, pure white, that'll displace it the most. So anything that's white on this layer will displace your layer below it. Everything that's black won't. So that's going to create that disjointed glitch effect. So let's have a look. Come to your core animation on the displacement map effect. Make sure that the displacement map layer selected is your fractal noise layer. And instead of source, choose effects and masks. So let's just make our fractal noise invisible. And now we can see that our core animation is affected by it, but it's not looking exactly right. It doesn't really look glitched. So let's come to our core animation, choose max horizontal displacement. I'm just going to push that across. There we go. Now that looks like a glitch. So what we want to do is animate that glitch in and out throughout the composition. Come here to the beginning and we're going to do it every few seconds. Click the stopwatch on our max horizontal displacement and our max vertical displacement. And you'll see if you press U on your core animation here, those keyframes are now there, but let's make sure they're 0. So 0 and 0. So the displacement map has no effect now. And then we go forward 3 frames, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to push this up. Oh, that's looking pretty good. And then 3 more frames forward, 1, 2, 3. We'll make that back down to 0, 0, and 0. Well, let's do that every few seconds. Choose little spots, copy those keyframes, Control C, move forward. Let's do it there, Control V. So it comes in there every few seconds, boom. Okay, and then maybe when it rotates, let's do one there, glitch, and then next movement, let's do one there. That's pretty good. But we don't want it to glitch the whole layer, only parts of it. So we can actually come here to our fractal noise layer and mask sections out. So I'm going to mask like little strips. That's looking good there. So now it's only going to apply it to little sections. Then what we can do is click on our fractal noise layer and Control-Shift-C or Command-Shift-C to pre-compose. We'll just call that our fractal noise composition. Then on that layer, we're going to apply something called posterize time. And what that does is it'll just make the effect look a little bit more disjointed, right? What posterized time does is you can change that frame rate from 24 and make it look like it's actually more like an animation, like 10 frames a second or even less. So let's change that down to 10 and see what that looks like. It'll just look a little bit more jagged and disjointed, just like a glitch should look. Perfect. Now, I want that glitch to be at a bit of an angle and not straight horizontal. So come to your fractal noise layer, press R, and you'll notice if you rotate it, it doesn't do anything. You can see the mask rotating, but the effect isn't actually rotating. So how do we do that? Well, we can actually apply a transform effect to that layer so that the rotation is applied to the effects as well, not just the layer like it's doing with our normal rotation, but to the effects. So right click your layer, fractal noise, effect, distort, and transform. Now you see all your transform properties here, and we can come in here to rotation, rotate it slightly, and now our glitch is at a cool angle. So let's take a look at this. Minimize all our layers and take a look. I'm pretty damn happy with that. So that's it, guys. This has been a long tutorial, but as soon as I saw that loading animation, I was like, I gotta do a tutorial about that. I hope you learned something. I hope you took something away from some of the techniques that I use to animate these shapes. Hopefully they'll come in handy for you in any future motion graphics or any animation that you're doing.
Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, please hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to my channel. Today's tutorial was slightly different, but I think we covered some really cool techniques just to get those basics of motion graphics down pat. See you next time, guys.